builders of God's kingdom. I'm not going to take no time off of Doc's presentation. He's got a really good presentation. If you haven't seen it, it really makes you think of what actually happened during that time. And I try to visualize of what it must have been like there for the people when Jesus Christ had to go through everything that he done. The people that loved him so dearly at that time, even some of those wouldn't even accept what was getting ready to happen. They denied, we read the Bible, they denied Jesus at that time. And then once you realize what happened, you read it through the Bible, it amazes me every time that he puts this presentation on, and I think it's a good one what the body could actually go through. My body probably couldn't do it. I would probably give up and die too quick. But Jesus did it. He suffered a lot for each and every one of us. Brother Doc will bring the message.
Sunday's Easter, and I had come up my turn to give a lesson, so I thought I'd go ahead and give this lesson again. It's very, like I was telling Brother Jim, I've done it a lot of years, and I keep learning from it. It's something of what Jesus did for us. Brother Steve Bliffen, well, I guess it's 30 years ago, had found an article in the Journal of American Medical Association on the crucifixion or the physical death of Jesus, and he wanted me to comment on it, and so he started me. I gave a presentation there at his congregation, and then I gave others notes. So it's grown over the years I've given it quite a few times in different places, and I'm going to take my time today because I want to, I got a tendency to get all excited and get into the lesson and maybe miss a few things that I think are really important to remember about what Jesus suffered. From what we can understand and know, Jesus died in Jerusalem in AD 30. He just was finishing up a 3-year ministry, and he was coming to gather with the other Jews for the Passover feast, and the Passover feast was a week-long gathering of the Jews to commemorate their release from slavery from the Egyptians hundreds of years before. But at this time, the Jews were still under bondage again to the Romans, and Brother Tom kind of helped me out a couple of weeks ago, and it turns out that they'd been in they had surrendered to the Romans around 63 BC, so they'd been captured by the Romans for a number of years. Jerusalem was usually a city of about 50,000 people, but at the time of these feasts or festivals or commemorative events, there would be Jews gathering there from all over the world. So that city of 50,000 would swell to from 300,000 people up to about 1 million. I've seen estimates up to 1 million people. So there's just a lot of people gathered there, and that would be the reason that Pontius Pilate, who was the governor, Roman governor of Judea, was there. He was usually stationed on the Mediterranean Sea at Caesarea, and that would be the reason that Herod Antipas would have been there. He was usually up in Tiberias on the Sea of Galilee. So that's why these men were there. And of course, we know that these men played a major event that was about to happen, about to take place. Jesus came, and I was telling Brother Jim or I think Sister Gay, that even in, like I say, I learned more and more as you study these things. That Jesus had come down from Galilee, and he'd come into Jericho, and he come from Jerusalem. Came into Jerusalem from Jericho. And we know Jericho, the Jericho road's about a 16-mile road, and it's an unusual place in that Jericho is 800 feet below sea level, and Jerusalem's 2,300 or 2,500 feet above sea level. So all that, he had to walk that road, and that's about 16 miles uphill, curvy road, tough, dangerous place. So just the beginning of the first part of what he was doing was a difficult thing. But he came into Bethany. That was on a Friday before the Passover. His friends, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, lived there, and he went to stay with them. That was on a Friday. And then on a Saturday, which was a Sabbath day, he spent the Sabbath day with them in Bethany. Then on Sunday, he made his triumphal entry into Jerusalem. And we remember how they welcomed him. He had a tremendous support. He had a lot of people following him. And of course, this caught the eye of the leaders in Jerusalem because those folks lived on, even they had levels where they walked, where they wouldn't walk down with the common people. And Jesus had gotten the support of the common people because he served them and worked for them and did a lot for them. On that week, what we call the Passion Week, Jesus would go into Jerusalem. He'd teach, preach. I noticed in reading my Gospels that he would be in debates with the Pharisees and other people. He once, I think it was on a Tuesday, turned over the tables of the money changers, and so he was coming in with his commitments and kind of pretty much an anti-establishment kind of presence. The Passover feast would have been on Thursday, April the 6th in AD 30. So there was a Passover feast that was to be after sundown on that Thursday. That would have been like, in those terms, it would like been the 14th of Nisan, that was the way they measured them. That's our April, May. So on that Thursday, after dark, Jesus went into town, or sent into town, had a room prepared for him and his disciples to partake of the Passover feast. And that meal was to be remembered as the Lord's Supper. And this kind of illustration where this was supposed to be is, I think, in the upper room in here, and it was in a residential area in, here it is, upper room, the residential area in Jerusalem. Judas, he, of course, was the man that betrayed Jesus, and he was one of his disciples, And he, at that evening meal, he ate with Jesus. From there, he went out to meet with the priests and to where he made arrangements for 30 pieces of silver to betray Jesus. They'd already planned in taking Jesus' life. They about a month earlier or a little bit earlier, they'd actually sat down and made plans to kill Jesus. And they were just simply looking for an opportunity. They really didn't want to do this on Passover. They were afraid there's so many people, they're afraid to be riots and everything. But what Judas did is he gave them an opportunity to carry this out. From the Lord's Supper, from the Passover meal, Jesus took some of his friends and went into Gethsemane, which is on the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives is a mile-long olive grove just on the northeast of Jerusalem, and it's elevated. It's about 200 feet above the elevation above Jerusalem, and from the Mount of Olives you can see, by report, of course I've never been there, but you could see Mount Zion. It was about 200 feet above Mount Zion in Jerusalem. You could also see the Dead Sea. I didn't know you could see that far, but it was a place that Jesus spent a lot of time in prayer. His favorite place there was in Gethsemane, and and Judas knew that. He knew where he'd like to go pray. So after their meal in the Passover meal, they went to the Garden of Gethsemane to pray. And this is truly where Jesus' suffering began, both emotional and physical. In Matthew 26:38, I'm going to read a few of these verses as I go along. Anyway, here it is. Matthew 26:38. It says, when Jesus had talked to his friends, said, "Wait here and watch for me. I'm going to go and pray." And this statement, I think, was absolutely astounding. It says, now we're talking about a young man that's healthy, and there's no fault to him at all, no flaw. He says, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." He was about to die from sorrow, just heartbreak. He asked his friends to stay here and keep watch with him. And I was reading one of the commentaries, and I thought it was just amazing what he said. The wrath of God was turned loose on him. He was already feeling this burden of our sins. He was to pay for it. And God hates sin, and somebody had to pay. So Jesus was already feeling this burden as he got to the Garden of Gethsemane. As you remember, he went off to pray, and he come back and checked on his friends, and they were sleeping, and he was very disappointed about that. It struck him, and he expressed his disappointment to them. But he did that 3 times, and they were sleeping every time. And Luke records that Jesus prayed that God would take that cup of suffering from him, that he wouldn't have to go through this suffering. And Luke records that he prayed so earnestly that his sweat became as drops of blood. Well, Luke, being a physician, would know about what a condition we call hematidrosis or hemohidrosis, and that is a situation where people under duress, under severe anguish, can actually hemorrhage into the sweat glands, and have been recorded that they can sweat blood. So Luke doesn't say that he did. He said he has drops of blood. But Luke, living in the time that he did, and the position that he was, probably had seen people actually sweat blood. The thing about that is it makes the skin real tender, just like a burn. I'd say it's like a burn. So whatever, if that would be the case, we know Jesus suffered a lot, but whatever he suffered from this time on would be more intense, from the crown of thorns to the slaps and the beatings and the whatever else he had to go through from then on. It would not produce a lot of blood loss, but like I say, it would make everything more intense from here on out. Jesus was arrested after midnight on Thursday evening at midnight, after midnight, And of course, we know he was betrayed by Judas. He was picked out with a kiss, by a kiss to him. And there was a group of armed men, probably some Roman soldiers, but probably most of the Jewish policemen or that kind of a person. And they were armed with clubs and swords, and they were sent by the Sanhedrin. Now, the Sanhedrin is a Jewish high court, and they were composed of around 70, 71 men that were high-ranking people, from the priests to the Pharisees, Sadducees, different people high rank. This is their highest court. And like I said earlier, they'd already planned, maybe a month or more earlier, they already sat down and planned that they were going to kill Jesus, but this is giving them an opportunity. So they sent these men with Judas to pick him out, to arrest him and bring him in. There was a struggle, and we know Peter pulled a sword and cut off Malchus's ear, and almost surely he wasn't aiming for his ear, but Jesus said there would be no struggle, and he actually put Malchus's ear. Malchus was the servant of the chief priest Caiaphas, but he was pretty much a leader, but he restored his ear and said there'd be no struggle like that. Then his all his companions, disciples, they all left. They ran because they were afraid that they were going to be arrested, of course. And I remember I just made a note of this, that I'd given this talk to a group of folks one time, and there was a Catholic priest there in the group, and he made a statement after our little talk that of all the things that Jesus went through, he was struck by that most, that all of his friends abandoned him. He was abandoned by everyone. And Jesus predicted that they would be abandoned before morning. The trials, Jesus' trials, was in two parts. One was Jewish and one was Roman. After his arrest, he was taken into Jerusalem. There was an estimate, I've seen these things, you read through them, that he may have been pulled, dragged, pushed, whatever, along about 2.5 miles that night, going from place to place. But he was first, when he brought him into Jerusalem, he was first brought to Annas. One of the Gospels called Annas the chief priest, but really he wasn't the chief priest at the time. Annas had been the chief priest from 5 to 16 A.D. And now this is a very influential position, very, very powerful position, very wealthy people. The excavations there that they've done in Jerusalem and other places where these people live were absolute plush manners. They were just, they were extremely wealthy. And of course this man was very powerful. But in 16 A.D., the Romans deposed him. They took him out of office. But Annas was able to keep first his sons, then his son-in-law, which is Caiaphas. He was able to keep his son-in-law as the chief priest, high priest. And so a lot of speculation that maybe he was really the man behind the scenes kind of orchestrating this thing. We don't know. But at any rate, they first went to Annas, and then they went to Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin. This is all before daylight. I mean, this is all from the wee hours of the morning. And during this time, he's been questioned, he's been mocked, he's been humiliated, he's been, they blindfolded him, they hit him with fists, they slapped him, just bring him down as low as they could do it. And then his final Jewish appearance was at the full council, the council of the Sanhedrin. And this, by the way, was all illegal. This was against their laws, but this was done. And the final charge was blasphemy, which is speaking out against God. And to the Jews, that was punishable by death. But they couldn't carry out an execution. They had to send it to the Romans, who were the people in power at the time. And so from there, they went to Pilate, and the Roman officials started their day at daylight, around 6 o'clock, apparently. And Pilate really didn't want much to do with this man. He could see pretty obvious that he wasn't a threat, and he didn't want any part of it. So, but the Jews insisted. So he sent him over to Herod Antipas, who was the Jewish leader in that. He was the tetrarch over Galilee and Idumea, and so Galilee was Jesus' home. So that's why Pilate sent him over there. So it's maybe pass the buck. But Herod Antipas, I believe he's the one that I'm pretty sure that had John the Baptist beheaded. So it had to be something of a struggle for Jesus to stand before Herod Antipas, knowing that he killed John the Baptist. And Herod had tried to get him to perform some miracles for him and all that, and do magic, in other words. But Jesus had no part of that. So they sent him back to Pilate, and just because of the persistence of the crowd there, he sent him to be crucified or executed. Now, blasphemy to Pilate meant nothing, but what they used was treason. And they let it be known to Pilate that they'd take it to Caesar if he didn't, pursue this charge of treason. So Pilate had to give in and turn him over to be executed. It was the Roman law that before anybody could be crucified, they had to be scourged. And remember, no Roman citizen would be crucified. This was a humiliating death. This was death for slaves and things like that. So, but before anybody could be crucified, they had to be scourged. Scourging was terrible. It was a brutal event. The individual was stripped of his clothing and was tied to a post, and he was beaten with a flagrum, which was a whip with a wooden handle, and it would have like sharp shards of bone and sharp pieces of metal in the leather, and then it would have that was to shred flesh, and it would have lead balls on it, so it could bruise deeply too. And there was usually two lictors, two individuals standing on each side. The Jewish law would limit those licks that he would receive to 39, because the limit was 40, and they would be afraid to go over 39. So if you can imagine taking even 3 licks or 10 with that thing, but these individuals would go 39. Romans didn't have any rule; they just beat them till they got tired of beating them, I guess. But and we know Jesus suffered a brutal beating. His was worse than usual. After the scourging, the individual, in this case Jesus, was crucified. Remember, there were two common criminals. He was crucified between two common people. They were being crucified at the same time. But the process of crucifixion itself had a long history. It gone back to the Persian Empire and the Greeks. The Greeks would crucify a whole town. So it was an act of terrorism for them, because they knew that next town wouldn't be as hard to take. So, but it was the Romans that made the most out of crucifixion. It was very common for these people. One of the emperors was very proud of the fact that he crucified 20,000 people at once, where the whole force been cut down to crucify everybody. But then, and there were different forms of crosses. But in Jesus' day, the Romans used what they call a tall cross. And usually it consisted of a stipes, which was the upright post, and a patibulum, which is a crossbar. And usually the stipes was a permanent post, was a permanent fixture. And it was, as a rule, the patibulum is what people would carry to their execution. In this case, in Jesus' case, they think about a third of a mile he would have had to carry that. We know he couldn't because they got Simon Serini to carry it. He was too weak to carry his patibulum. It weighed about 30, 40 pounds. The cross itself would be about from 6 to 8 feet. I guess it'd be about this roof from the ceiling, right? About 8 feet. That's about how tall that cross would be. And they would take them and they would affix them to the cross. Usually they would nail them to the cross. They would throw them down and fix them to the patibulum. And there's been some debate on, well, was it through the hands or was it wrist? The thing about the ancient people, they made no distinction between the wrist and the hand. It was all hand. So when they said they nailed their hands, this much I know, it would have been far more painful to nail them through the wrist. They'd hammer it right through the carpal bones. That would have been real, that would have been very painful. The most painful thing probably was severing the median nerve. If anybody had carpal tunnel or anybody's carpal tunnel, that's the median nerve. So they just throw lancinating pain up both arms until they died. So probably that's what they chose. It'd be more painful. They know they'd be fixed to the cross that way, and they wouldn't have to support them any other way. And there'd be no major bleeding. You got your regular artery, but they could fix it where nobody would bleed to death from it. The purpose of crucifixion was to execute somebody with as much pain and suffering as possible. That's what crucifixion was for. So, and like I said, the Romans, thousands, a lot of Christians were crucified. Their feet was oftentimes feet were also nailed to the cross, and I got to reading through my Gospels, and there's been some debate whether Jesus' feet had been nailed to the cross, but I read where Jesus had appeared after his resurrection to his disciples, and he said, "Look at the scars in my feet." Remember, he said, "Look at my hands and feet." So apparently he was nailed to the cross also, through his feet. While Jesus was on the cross, I usually make note of these two things. He spoke 7 times from the cross, recorded in the Gospels. Spoken 7 times, and I like to take note of this. Jesus was placed on a cross at 9 o'clock in the morning, and he died at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Pontius Pilate knew when Joseph of Arimathea went to ask for his body, he was surprised that he died so soon. Some people would be on the cross for 2 or 3 days. You know, birds of prey picking the flesh off, etc. Just a horrible thing. But Jesus did speak 7 times. There's 2 of these that I like to make note of. In Mark 15:34, he says, let's see, there's one before that. Luke. Let's see. Yeah. Oh yeah, it is. It's Mark 15:34. It said in Aramaic, that was a common language at the time. It said, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? So here's this young man has gone to the cross in obedience to his heavenly Father. And God, I believe this is God's decision to do that. You suffered all. You suffered to the point, I'm going to sleep you. He left him there and being convinced that God had abandoned him. I think that's a total sin. That's when it's all done. But there's another one, another verse that I bring up. It's in that's in Luke. In Luke 23:46, it says, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. He didn't go into a coma. He didn't lapse into a coma. A lot of them did, most did, and then die in a coma. He didn't accept their pain medicines or anything. He was alert when he died. He was coherent. He knew what was happening. So he chose his time to go. He'd been obedient. The pathophysiology, a lot of people are, of course, of interest of what really, what kind of thing that took his life. And there are a lot of factors involved. You know, exposure was cold, and he was hanging on with no clothes. A lot of blood loss from the beating, just being suspended. You can go into heart failure just by hanging anybody up and just hanging there, and their heart fails. But probably the most significant was smothering. When they were nailed up there, they were in inhalation. They couldn't use their muscles to exhale. So, in order to exhale, they had to pull up against those nails, push up against those, against that cross to exhale. So that's a condition called exhaustive asphyxia. In other words, they smothered to death. So this is probably of the pathophysiology of crucifixion. That was the most prominent part. The Jews that insisted that those people were to be off the cross by the Sabbath, and they had several Sabbaths during that just feast days or during that week. It is a week of festivities, and and the way they could do that is they would there's a thing called crucifracture. They go break the legs of the prisoners below the knees, so they couldn't push up to breathe. So they'd suffocate very quickly, very shortly. And they done it to the other 2 prisoners that were there. They broke their legs. But they come to Jesus and he was already dead. And just to confirm that, just to make sure he's dead, because it was those soldiers' responsibility to make sure they were dead by a certain time. This one soldier threw a spear into Jesus' side. And so when they did, out came blood and water. We remember that verse. Well, one explanation for that is under those kind of conditions, when someone suffers like that, they can form fluid in the pleural space. Pleural diffusions, it's clear fluid. It's in the pleural space and the pericardial space. And this again is from a medical article published by pathologists at the Mayo Clinic. So these people study these kind of things all the time. But that would be one explanation for the blood and water. So here would come blood from the chamber of the heart and pleural effusion from the lungs and the pericardial effusion from the sac of the heart. So that would be one explanation for the blood and water. So what I like to try to do, what I try to do in these lessons, to show that Jesus suffered it all. They left no part out. I mean, the mental anguish to the point of sweat and blood, probably, and the fact that he did take our burden of sin on him. That was to begin with. That's when he was just about to die from sorrow, when he went to just started the whole process. So he suffered everything, physically, mentally, emotionally. This is something I wanted everybody to see. But so we're going to have the invitation. We have another invitation song. If you've chosen that it's time for you to accept Jesus as your Savior, you need to come forward.
I want to thank Dr. Frederick. An intelligent person will have reason and logic behind the decision. And I think you just saw it there. Let's stand and sing number 386. We all need satisfaction. We all need happiness.